longer rope for this month. I don't know. Oh, hey kids, and welcome back to Super Kids Church. I'm so excited to have you with us. We are grabbing our backpacks and getting our hats on and heading into the woods this month because we need to climb some mountains. We're going to be climbing mountains all month because we've been talking about this wonderful epic story of Jesus, right? We've been talking about how this epic story of God's love all leads to Jesus. And each month we're going to be studying a different chapter of God's epic story for us. And last month we enjoyed a wonderful time going to the circus and having fun and doing a high wire adventure on trust. And this month we are going to be going a little bit adventurous into the mountains together. And we can understand that in God's epic story and in any story we read, as you flip the pages, there's ups and there are downs, right? There are mountains and there are valleys. There are so many things that go up and down, and the most exciting part about stories is when it has a cliffhanger. Who here likes to climb? Miss Liv actually does not like heights, but she loves to climb. Super weird, isn't it? I don't really care for heights, but I do actually like to go rock climbing. But I really like to have a good harness on me in order to rock climb because I don't like heights, but I do love to climb. And a lot of times we enjoy life that has cliffhangers, right? We enjoy a good movie with a good cliffhanger. Or maybe you have your favorite TV show and it always ends with that cliffhanger and you're hanging on that cliff and you're like, oh, what is going to happen next? But in stories it's really cool, but in our own lives, sometimes cliffhangers can be rough. Life requires a lot of grit when it comes to life when we have cliffhangers, because the fact of the matter is God's story is continuing today, which means that there shouldn't be as many cliffhangers because we know that God is awesome, but in order we can understand with our minds that God is awesome and we can have trust in Him, but we need to have grit even when life gets a little hard. I mean, rock climbing is really hard and mountains are hard, and there are moments in life where life becomes really hard. And those are the times we need grit. Now, I've been saying grit a lot so far because that is our word of the month. And we've defined grit as refusing to give up when life gets hard. You see, life is going to have those ups and downs. And there's going to be times where there are cliffhangers in our life where God is moving, but we don't quite understand where He's going. And we have a cliffhanger at that point. And when those cliffhangers come and we are hanging on for dear life, it feels like, or life is just so hard and there are circumstances and things going on that we don't want to deal with, we need to have grit to not give up even though life is getting hard. Now, how do we know that God helps us with our grit? Well, we go to the Word of God, right? We believe the Word of God is true, which means that everything in there is a promise for you too, right? God's story is still continuing today through your lives, and if He had helped others have grit, He can help you have grit. And what helps us understand that is the Bible, right? And our memory verse comes from Galatians 6:9, and it helps us understand this grit. And it reads, "Let us not become tired of doing good. At the right time, we will gather a crop if we don't give up." You see, there's going to be times in our lives where we don't want to do good anymore because life is just hard. And it would be a lot easier to lie, cheat, and steal something than it is to do it the right way, right? Remember when we talked about Jacob last month? And when life gets tough and life gets hard, we should not grow tired of doing good. We should still choose to do good. Because when we do, God helps us with our grit. And when we don't give up, we can see a mighty harvest. We can see God do crazy and amazing things through our lives. Now, every single week, we have a Pause Miss Liv moment. And our Pause Miss Liv moment is going to need to take some patience, but it's also a science experiment. So for our Pause Miss Liv moment today, you're going to need 3 cups that are of equal height. And you're going to need some food dye, all right? So what you're going to do is we are going to make a rainbow experiment. experiment, a rainbow glasses experiment. And you're going to need some paper towels, 3 glasses, and some food dye. What you're going to do is you're going to fill the 2 outside glasses, okay, with the same amount of water. And you are going to put whatever color food dye you want in yours. I have chosen blue and red today for mine, but at home you could choose whatever you want. And I would love you to do this science experiment as well, okay? While we do Kids Church today, okay? But I'm also going to do it on screen so that way you can see how this experiment works. All right, so you're going to need a paper towel. Now for this paper towel, you're going to have to fold it in half, fold it in half again, all right, and fold it in half one more time. So you should have a paper towel that's about 1 inch wide, like this, okay? And you're going to kind of press it down to make sure it stays like that. And you're going to have to do that 2 times, all right? So I have 2 here. Now, after you've done this, all right, you are going to put your paper towels into your glasses like so, like little rainbows, okay? So your one end will be in your empty cup. Remember, I have one that's empty, and one will go in your first color. And then on the other side, one will go in your empty cup, and one will go in your other color cup, all right? And as you do this, you'll start to see something crazy happen, all right? You'll start to see that the paper towel is starting to take your color up the paper towel. All right, and what you're going to do is you're going to set up this science experiment, and then you're going to push it to the side. You're going to leave it as is and come back for the rest of Kids Church, and we're going to go see what happens at the end of our science experiment, okay? So we're going to set this up. You'll pause Miss Liv and set yours up, all right? And we'll come look at this at the end of Kids Church today. Sound good? Are you ready to pause Miss Liv? In 3, 2, 1, pause Miss Liv. So, as you return from setting up your experiment and pushing it to the side, what is your hypothesis? What do you think is going to happen with our rainbows of color? What do you think is going to happen in that middle cup? Do you think it'll stay empty? Do you think it'll fill? Do you think the colors will matter? Well, we're going to once again leave our experiment to see what happens until the end of Kids Church. So just set it aside and let it be there. And let's see what happens as time continues. Sound good? So while we are waiting on our science experiment to do its thing, you are ready for our Bible story, aren't you? Now, before we get to our Bible story, we always have to go over the backstory, right? So Miss Liv has her Bible here, and let's go over what we've already learned in God's great story of love for us, okay? So far we know that God created the earth, right? And he created the earth for us so that he could have a relationship with us and that we could have a safe place to live, right? He wanted to have a relationship with us, right? But then we also know about Adam and Eve, right? And Adam and Eve, they were great, right? But they chose poorly and chose to disobey God. So sin entered the world and we had to pay the consequences, as did they, right? But that was not the end of our story. God still made a promise to Abraham, right? God made a promise to Abraham that he would bless the whole world through Abraham and he would give him the number of descendants as there was in the sky, which was so incredibly awesome, right? And God had a promise of a Savior to save us from our sins way back when, and he made that promise through Abraham. Well, we know that Abraham had a problem, though. If God was going to bless him through Abraham, bless the world through Abraham, Abraham had no family. He didn't have a son. But God blessed them with a son named Isaac, right? And when they were very old, Abraham was 100, Sarah was 90, God blessed them with a son. And through that son, he was going to continue his promise to bless the whole world. Now, after Abraham had died, his son, Isaac, continued to follow God and always chose to trust God. And God blessed his wells, and he was finally able to live in peace, right? But Isaac also needed a family, so he prayed that Rebekah would become pregnant, right, his wife, and they had 2 sons. And those 2 sons fought all the time, but one of them lied, cheated, and stole from the other to get what he wanted, and that was Jacob, right? But even though he lied, cheated, and stole to get the birthright and the blessing from Isaac, God still had a plan. And despite Jacob's sin, God still chose Jacob, because God is awesome, right? And last week we learned how Jacob had lived away from home for 20 years, and God had told him to return home. But he was afraid that Esau was still mad and upset with him. So he sent all this stuff ahead to try to appease Esau. But in reality, God was with him, right? And God promised that he was with him. And when he trusted God and went back to Esau, he was reunited with his brother, which is so incredibly awesome. And he got to go home and be with his family. So our story continues today. And as we continue, Miss Liv has to go get her digital Bible to see what happens after Esau and Jacob get back together. Now, Ms. Liv has her digital Bible. She hopes you have yours, and we are about to head into our Bible story today. So, as we stated before, we caught up to where we were. Ms. Liv tells a little bit of backstory before we start going into our story today. So, you're going to open up to Genesis 40 today, and as you open up, we will finish that backstory to find out. So, we know that Jacob and Esau continued to live in harmony in this land, and Jacob's family, remember I told you he had a huge family before he went back to Esau, and this huge family included 11 sons. Now you might be sitting here because you might know the story and be like, wait, I thought Jacob had 12 sons. Well, he did, but at the point of our story, he only had 11 of them. And those 11 ended with a boy named Joseph. Joseph was the first son of his second wife, and Joseph was his favorite. And his father chose favorites, just like his father before him chose favorites. Remember, Isaac and Rebekah still chose favorites in their family, which was kind of a detriment to them. But sadly, Jacob didn't learn his lesson, and he still had a favorite son, and his favorite son was Joseph. Jacob loved Joseph so much that he gave him a beautiful, expensive, colorful robe. Now, Jacob's robe had many colors. Miss Liv only has 2 colors on hers, so you'll have to use your imagination. But he gave him a robe with so many colors. And Joseph was special in Jacob's eyes. But Joseph was also special in God's eyes. I mean, because we're all special in God's eyes, right? And as Jacob grew, Jacob started having very interesting dreams. He was a dreamer. And God would give him dreams. And he would go and he would run to tell his brothers about his dreams. And we're going to actually start our story in Genesis 37, but we'll end in 40, okay? So we're going to go to 37:7 and see what his first dream was. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. So all of a sudden, Jacob was having a dream about sheaves, right? And that was what they harvested. So I almost like imagine wheat, right? And it was the plant that they were harvesting, except the plants were different. There were 2 different types. One stood up and one bowed down, right? And the one that stood up straight was Jacob's, and the one that his brothers had bowed down to him. Now, if you are the youngest of your family, okay, and you start telling your brothers that they're going to bow down to you because God gave you a vision, how do you think your brothers are going to react? Well, Joseph's brothers were not pleased to hear about this dream. Let's look at that next verse to see what they do. His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. You see, Joseph's brothers already had it out for him because he was already their father's favorite. And he wasn't the oldest, he was the youngest. And here we are, Jacob has a dream about 2 different types of stalks here, and they're bowing down to him. So of course his brothers are going to get super angry, even more so, because It's like, who are you? Come on, you're already our Father's favorite. I mean, especially the one who's the oldest in the family. We just talked about how in our story last month, how Isaac had chose favorites, and how there was a battle over who the head of the family was going to be in that birthright, and Jacob stole it from Esau, and Esau got angry, right? Because the older brother is the one that deserves it. Really, Joseph wasn't supposed to get a lot. So his brothers wound up hating him. And sadly, Joseph had another dream from God. This dream is different than the first dream, but the reason I use sadly is because honestly his brothers didn't have a better reaction to this one either. So another day Joseph told them about another dream he had. Let's go read the next verse to see what that was. Then he had another dream, and he told his brothers, "Listen," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." So now we're starting to talk about things in the sky, right? And once again, Joseph is there. And there are sun, moon, and stars, right? There's a sun and a moon. I'm sure that replaces, that's his mom and his dad. And then there were 11 stars. And those stars and the moon and the sun were bowing down to Joseph. Now, according to Joseph's dreams, you would get the understanding that his father, mother, and brothers would one day bow down to him, right? Remember? Sun, moon, stars, all bowing down to him. But is this news that would please his brothers? Of course not. Joseph's brothers became even more jealous of him. Not only do you have this cool coat, you get to do what you want, our mother and father love you more, and here you are saying, "I'm going to bow down to you"? Even your father's going to bow down to you? Now, wait a second here. So when Jacob sent Joseph to check up on his brothers in the field a day later, or some time later, his brothers started to get back at him. His brothers are like, "Who are you? Why do you keep checking on us? Why are you even here? You keep saying that we're going to bow down to you, but you don't do work. You're not here. Why are you here?" And his brothers are just so incredibly upset with Joseph at this point. Saying, "Who are you? You're the youngest in this family. How dare you think I'm going to bow down to you?" So, as he goes out in the fields to check on his brothers tear off his robe. All right? They take it off of him. And they throw their brother into an empty well. Now wells, remember, they're really, 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 really deep. In fact, one of the wells that we talk about in the Bible was 100 feet deep. There is no way you're going to get out of that well. And now I don't know how deep this well was, but I know it was deep enough that Joseph could not get out. So while Joseph is in the wells, they're looking at his coat of colors, and they're trying to figure out, what are they going to do with their brother? What are they going to do with him? And as they are angrily thinking about this, I almost wonder if some of them thought maybe we should kill him. Maybe some of them thought, "Hey guys, like, this is too far. Let's get him out." But regardless, when it came to deciding what they were going to do, they saw that there were some traders heading to Egypt passing. And they said, "Oh, here we go. Here's a good compromise. Instead of letting him out and letting him go, and instead of killing him, we'll just sell him into slavery and send him off to Egypt." So at this point in our story, Joseph has gone from the one that his father loves with this beautiful coat to the one that God gives dreams to, and he has these amazing dreams of what God has called him to a pit that he can't get out of, and then into the hands of traders to be a slave. So we went from Jacob's house to a pit, and now he's going to go from a pit to a man named Potiphar. Now, before we get to how Joseph got to Potiphar, let's talk about his brothers right now. You might be like, "Okay, well, what happened to his brothers? How do you just go home and say, 'Oh, we lost your brother, sorry'?" No! Joseph's brothers continued the ruse, and they took his robe and tore it, and they put some animal blood on it, and they basically took it home and told their father that Joseph had died. And his father believed that Joseph was gone forever. And I'm sure he wept and he grieved over that, while all his brothers went, well, now we don't have to deal with that anymore. And Jacob and Joseph's brothers continued to live their life in the land. And now Joseph found himself in Egypt. Now, Joseph didn't know anyone in Egypt, and he did not speak the language. However, even though he was thrown into a pit, remember, he still received visions from God, and God had chosen him for a purpose, and Joseph wasn't done yet. So, even though he didn't know anybody in Egypt or speak the language, he had God with him. Now, Joseph was sold into slavery, all right, and he was doing different things, and as he was doing those different things for this man named Potiphar, he worked so hard and did so well that over several years, he gained Potiphar's trust. Now, back in Egypt times, you'll always see them get a white robe when they have gained some form of stature, right? So Joseph turned in his coat of many colors for a coat of white, and he had gained trust from Potiphar, and Potiphar put Joseph in charge of his entire estate. Basically meant that Joseph was second in charge of this man's entire wealth, his fields, his flocks. He told the servants what to do to take care of Potiphar's stuff. Now, while he's there, I mean, you could see that God was with him, right? Because he went from having dreams and a coat of many colors to a pit. But then he was in a pit to slavery, but God was with him because now he had brought him out of slavery to be someone who helped Potiphar and had great trust. And he had brought himself up from that pit, right? God had brought him up from that pit and blessed him with this great job in Egypt, where he didn't have to worry about being a slave or wonder where his next food was. He was in charge. Now, sadly, this is not the end of our story. So, we can see the grit, right? Remember, we're talking about grit, not giving up when life is hard, of Joseph, how he took his pit experience and being sold to Potiphar and worked really hard and did not give up and reached this great place of stature. But once again, not the end of the story. You see, Potiphar had a wife, and Potiphar's wife, she thought Joseph was awesome. And she thought she could convince Joseph to do anything. And she tried to talk Joseph into doing something wrong. Well, Joseph, who understands grit and doesn't give up when life is hard, okay, chose to do the right thing. He chose to not do what the wife had asked, and he chose to just continue to move forward with what Potiphar had asked him to do. And in fact, his wife, Potiphar's wife, then pushed even harder for Joseph to do something wrong. And Joseph literally refused so hard that he ran out of the place, leaving his cloak behind, and ran out and said, "No, I am not going to do anything against Potiphar, who has helped me. I am not going to do anything wrong because God has called me to do things that are right and just and trustworthy," right? Well, then Potiphar's wife saw his thing still on the ground here and picked it up and used this to convince Potiphar and lied that Joseph tried to hurt her. So Potiphar believed his wife over Joseph because of the evidence of leaving his cloak behind, and surely his wife wouldn't lie. And how dare you attack my wife, right? And he sends Joseph to jail. So at this point, we have seen Joseph have some great highs of these beautiful visions from God, right? to go to some great lows of being in a pit and sold into slavery, to go into another great high of doing his best work and becoming great in Potiphar's household, to being lied to and now thrown in jail for something he didn't even do. Joseph had always chosen to do the right thing. Joseph had always chosen to work hard and continue on. But once again, we're in another pit. Except this one has chains. And we're in prison. But you see, Joseph never gave up his grit. Even though life was hard, he never gave up because he knew something. He knew that God was going to be with him. And you know what? Even though he was in this prison pit here, God was still with him. So even in prison, Joseph worked really hard, and he cleaned up after people, and he worked really hard to help maybe feed the people. I don't know, the Bible doesn't tell us exactly what he did, but we know that he worked hard in this prison to the point where the jailer noticed him. So the man who ran the jail, the warden, was so impressed, he put Joseph in charge of everything. He was like, wow, Joseph, like, you really got this wrapped up and good. So how about you go take care of when the prisoners get fed. You clean up everything. You go and take care. And he put him in charge of everything. So yet again, another pit. And Joseph comes up and he is blessed with being in charge of things. Why? Because he never gave up. And he was trustworthy. And he always did the right thing. So one day, 2 prisoners arrived, and obviously Joseph had to take care of them because he's in charge, right? So 2 prisoners arrived, and one prisoner was the Pharaoh's baker, and one prisoner was the Pharaoh's drink taster. Now, Joseph knew that God could help him figure out anything, right? And both of these men, all right, that he's in the cell with, that he's taking care of, have dreams. And Joseph knows that he's had a dream before, right? And he can recognize when it's from God and what God is speaking through it, right? That's how he knew. And he went and told his brothers about those dreams in the very beginning of our story, right? So Joseph trusted God and he went to go interpret their dreams. And Joseph told them what they meant. The drink taster's dream had to do with vines and grapes, and how they were growing, right? And Joseph told the man that his dreams meant that Pharaoh would release him from prison and give him his old job back. Pharaoh would recognize that he didn't do anything wrong and he'd get his job back. And as he tells him this, he asks the man a favor. Let's go to 40:14. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. You see, Joseph noticed that this man was sent to prison wrongly, just like he was. And he worked for Pharaoh. And God had blessed this man to go back to work for Pharaoh. And so Joseph just asked this one thing, please don't forget me. When you get your job back, don't forget me. Tell Pharaoh about me and how I helped you. So I'm sure the man at that point said, okay, yeah, I can do that. Cool, thanks for the dream. And then they continued on to talk about the baker's dream. The baker shared about how his dream had to do with bread and how it had molded and become bad and birds came and ate it all up. Joseph unfortunately had to tell the baker what his dream meant, what God was speaking through his dream. And he told the baker that Pharaoh would release him from prison just like the other man. However, that would be because he was going to be killed. He was going to be caught in his wrongdoing, and he was going to have a sentence. And at this point, I'm sure the cupbearer is super excited about Joseph, but this baker, not so much. Like, oh, you just lying. You don't know what you're talking about. Who are you? How dare you? Maybe like his brothers treated him, right? But come a few days later, everything happened just like Joseph had said. Sadly, the baker was convicted and his sentencing was taken out. but the cupbearer. The cupbearer was restored back to his original job, and he had gained his life back and was proven his innocence. And what do you think happened? What do you think happened there? Well, the cupbearer was so excited he got released. He went back to his job. Is that time for Jacob to get out? Is this it? Is this the moment that we've been waiting for? Where it's finally the point where maybe Jacob won't have to deal with, or maybe Joseph won't have to deal with any more loaves? Well, sadly, that is not the end of our story. And that is not the way the story went. The cupbearer forgot about Joseph. And Joseph stayed in his prison. You might ask then, well, what is the end of the story? Why does he have to stay in prison? How is that a good God? Are we sure God is still with him in that moment? My answer to you is yes, because the story's not over. This prison is not the end of Joseph's story. You may know what comes next, you may not, but really this is a cliffhanger, and this is a cliffhanger in Joseph's life. Joseph living this doesn't know the end of the story. We get to read the end of the story in the Bible, but this is a true cliffhanger in his life. He's like, oh my goodness, here I am again. I went from dreams to pits, to Potiphar, to being in charge, to prison, to being in charge, to possible release, to never mind. Everyone forgot you. So we went from dreams to a pit, to Potiphar, to prison again. But the thing is, we know the end of the story. So this cliffhanger for Joseph is not a cliffhanger for us. We know the end of the story. And we're going to figure out the end of that story next week, so you got to hang on to figure out what happens after prison. But before we get there, we want you to understand that even if Joseph may have felt alone in that prison, he wasn't. And Joseph may have felt alone in that pit, but he wasn't. Each time, no matter whether it was a high or a low, God was with him. It's easy to see how God is with you in those highs, right? It's easy to see how God gave Joseph those visions, and he could live in that understanding that God had given them to him, right? So he had a high, and we know that God was with him. And we know that God was with him with Potiphar, right? Because he had risen and worked really hard and risen to a point where he was in charge of Potiphar's whole household. And we can see how God was with him in prison as he rose through the stakes, and he had worked to the point where he was trusted and he was put in charge again. Sometimes it's so easy to see when God is with us in the good. But God is still with us in the bad, in the darkest hardships, in the deepest, most crazy situations. God is still with us. And God was with Joseph because we can see how God would bring him out of those pits, but that doesn't mean that he was alone in those pits. And in fact, Joseph, throughout his life, learned our point of the day, which is to hold on because God is with you. You see, this is Joseph's part of the story. And you can't read it here, but it says Joseph, part 1. This was only half of Joseph's life. This was only part of his story. I don't know what you're going through today, but you can always hold on and know that God is with you. We can look at Joseph's story and see how God was still with him, even in the pit that his brothers had thrown him in, even in the prison that Potiphar had thrown him in, even in the slavery that he got stuck in. God was still with him. And we can know that because Joseph had the strength to keep going on. He refused to give up when life was hard, even when it looked like he was in the deepest of pits and the deepest of the worst possible moments of his life. Being thrown in a pit by your brothers and told that and sold off to slavery by the people who love you, that was probably a big dark moment in his life. Being thrown in prison for something he didn't even do, another pit in his life. And then being forgotten by the man that he helped save because he shared what God was doing in his life. Another pit. Joseph lived a lot of highs and lows and had many cliffhangers in his life. But through the lows, he trusted in God, and he always did the right thing and kept moving forward. And every time he trusted God in those lows and understood and believed that God was with him in his lows, God was surely with him and blessed him and brought him out and brought him to the mountaintops. You see, we can trust that God is always with us. And even if we don't feel him around us and we're questioning and we're looking around going, God, what are you doing? I don't know what's going on in your life. You might have something hard going on, something super hard that you're like, how can this be God? How can God see me in this and not do something? But those are the moments we can trust and hold on and keep moving forward and refuse to give up and have that grit. Because when we trust in God's plan and we have the grit to move through even those hard times, God is going to bring us to an awesome mountaintop. So I don't know what you're going through in your life. You might be in a mountaintop right now where life is absolutely fantastic. Woohoo! That's awesome. I want to celebrate with you because God is with you. That's so awesome. But you might be in that valley that's super low, or maybe even below the valley in a pit. I want to rejoice with you too because God is still with you. And if we trust in his plan and hold on and keep fighting through, we're going to see that mountaintop. We're going to get there. And you're going to see God do amazing and mighty things through your life. So that brings us to what you can do this week. Well, at the beginning of Kids Church, we started with a science experiment. All right, you're going to go check out your science experiment and see what's going on there. What are you seeing in your science experiment of rainbow proportions? All right, have you noticed that your middle cup all of a sudden has water? Isn't that so cool? That your middle cup has water. And you may notice something about your middle cup. Now, I know on the screen it's hard to see, but my middle cup is starting to turn purple. And you want to know how I know that? It's because blue and red, when they're mixed together, make the color purple. So you make a rainbow of colors here. Now, why did we do this science experiment? Well, first, I wanted to show you that you can do the impossible with God, right? I mean, I did not pour any water in this middle one, did you? Have you tried this at home? Do you see water in your middle one? Isn't it cool how God works and how he can do the impossible? He can fill a cup with water even though I didn't pour any water in it. Isn't that cool? But it also is the colors to remind you of Joseph's coat of many colors and how he never gave up and he continued to move forward. And you can do this science experiment with different colors all week long. You can do new things too. All right. Another way you could do the science experiment is to fill each one with water and fill each one with a different color. So maybe fill the middle one with green and see what happens then to your paper towels instead. See if your paper towels change colors. Maybe you'll get a rainbow paper towel. It's super cool to see what God does with colors and how they can remind us of Joseph's coat of many colors and how we can hold on in the highs and the lows of life and God will be with us, right? It's super cool. Some other cool things you can do with your family this week is play some Twister. We did the coat of many colors this week. Do some Twister with those colors and have some fun with your family. Or go outside and trace some chalk hands. And maybe on each finger, maybe you have two hands, right? Maybe there's 5 things that are kind of like not great moments, but then 5 great things. So like when maybe for your not great moments are moments in your life that you remember, or maybe 5 things you're going through right now. Maybe you're moving, right? And you can put moving here on the first finger, but on your first finger over here, put something that God has done. And so when we're down from these 5 things, we can remember about these 5 things and how God was with us then, and surely he's with us with these 5 things too. All right? And just have some fun drawing with chalk and colors and do many things with colors this week as we remember Joseph's coat of many colors and experiment and have some awesome fun with what God is calling you to do. And no matter whether you're on that mountaintop or in that valley, trust in the Lord. And hold on and don't give up and keep moving forward. And you're going to see mighty, mighty things that God can do in your life. You can also go to lifechapelonline.com/kids. There you'll be able to download our parent queue and our devotionals for this week. You'll get a 252 video link as well as a link to this and some YouTube worship for some worship and some dancing. All right, you don't want to miss out on that YouTube playlist as well as we worship God and thank Him for all the great things that He's doing in our lives. And thank Him for being there for us even if we're in a low spot right now. All right, so don't forget to go to lifechapelonline.com/kids and check out all the stuff that we got going on at Life Chapel and download all those printables and have some awesome fun this week. All right, guys. So Miss Liv's going to pray, and I can't wait to see you next week. So as we go on another adventure, climbing a mountain, and seeing what God has in store next. Because we have a cliffhanger of a Bible story, and we got to finish it. All right, you guys ready to pray? All right, here we go. Dear God, I thank you for today. I thank you for this wonderful time we've had, and I thank you for the example of Joseph. I thank you that you are always there for him, and that because you are always there for him, we can be confident that you are always there for us. So whether we are in a mountain high, or we are in a valley low, or maybe we're in a pit, Lord, we can believe and know that you are with us, and you will help us get through it. Lord, I pray a special blessing over each and every kid and family watching this today. May you show them your presence, that no matter whether they're in a mountain high or a valley low, that you are with them, Lord. And help them to have grit, to hold on, and to make it through no matter what they're going through today, Lord. And give them the strength from you to keep moving forward. We thank you, Jesus. Amen. It's been a blast having you with us. I can't wait till next week. See you then.